Do you remember a time when you lost everything in the blink of an eye? Actually, it is exactly what took place with me. As a person who is 65 years old, my name is Grace, and I believed that I had endured every form of misery that life could possibly throw at me. I had a mistake. All of this began on a Wednesday in Charlotte, North Carolina that appeared to be no different than any other given Wednesday. When I smelled something peculiar, I was in the kitchen, going through the motions of making my typical cup of coffee in the afternoon. The aroma of coffee beans or the food I had eaten was not the cause. It was something that was on fire. As soon as I realized that I could have forgotten anything on the stove, I hurriedly went to check on it. When I opened the entrance to the living room, I was confronted by a thick, dark smoke that surrounded me. Through it, I could hardly see anything. The curtains were already being consumed by the flames, and the rate at which they were spreading caused me to pause for a moment during the process. Both my heart and my mind were racing, and I couldn't believe what was taking place. It was impossible for me to keep up with the rapid pace of the fire. It appeared as though everything was taking place in slow motion, and I was unable to comprehend what was going on. Despite the fact that the smoke detector ought to have been shrieking by this point, I quickly noticed that it had not gone off. I discovered that the battery had died some months before, which was yet another insignificant detail that I had failed to notice. And now, that one simple mistake was likely to cost me everything I had ever owned. Panic began to set in, but I had no alternative but to take immediate action. My handbag, which was resting on the kitchen table, was seized by me as I made a break for it and ran for the back door. The fire was just behind me at the time. As I was leaving, the last thing I saw was the portrait of Robert, who had been my spouse before he passed away. The frame had begun to become darkened as a result of the heat from the fire. I felt as though I was being cruelly reminded of all that I was so close to losing. In front of me, the house, the memories, and the years that we had spent in the home that we had built together were all vanishing with their passing. I was fighting for air when I stumbled out into the yard after eventually breaking through the back door. I was gasping for air. Because the smoke was so dense, it caused my throat to burn. Those who lived nearby were already out on the street, standing there in disbelief. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who is 78 years old, was the first person to get in touch with me during the time that we were both watching helplessly as the fire continued to devour my home. She gave me a firm hug. The only thing we could do was stand there and watch the flames grow. We were unable to do anything else. Not even a few minutes later, the fire department arrived, but it was already too late. By the time they were able to bring the fire under control, my house was already beyond the point of being saved. There was no success at all. In a single hour, everything that I had labored for and everything that I had constructed over the course of the previous 4 decades was gone. This is the table in the kitchen where my son David would sit and complete his schoolwork. These are the walls where I have been marking my son's height each year as he has grown taller. This was the bedroom that Robert and I had shared for the past 37 years. All of it had vanished. Every single thing. I was standing on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket that had been handed to me by a stranger. My body was numb. Soot was covering the fire chief's face as he approached, and his eyes were filled with compassion. What he said was, "I am so sorry, ma'am." Having him finish the statement was not necessary for me. In my own eyes, I could see it. Without a single thing remaining, I was fortunate enough to receive an offer of a place to stay for the night from the neighbors. However, Mrs. Jenkins urged that I stay with her, despite the fact that her apartment was already occupied by her grandkids who were visiting. I was at a loss about where to go. Despite the fact that the Red Cross had established emergency shelters for people like me, the idea of sleeping in a gymnasium full of strangers made me feel more isolated than it actually did comfort me. I was at a loss. At that point, I made the decision to give David a call. To my son. It was the only option left from which to choose. A suburban enclave in Charlotte known as Valentine was approximately 40 minutes away from where David had relocated. Although we did not have a particularly strong relationship, he was the only member of my family that I had left. He worked as a regional manager for an insurance firm. In order to reach him, I used Mrs. Jenkins' phone to dial his number because my own phone had been destroyed in the fire. "David, my sweetheart, it's Mom," I said to him. My voice was shaking badly. I tried not to come across as very furious, but I just couldn't help myself. In response, he asked his mother, "Mom, what's going on? You sound upset." "There was a fire, son. The house is gone. Everything's gone." A brief pause transpired. It is a lengthy one. I had the impression that time had stopped. The question that he asked was, "Were you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Just a few scrapes and a scratchy throat from the smoke. But I need a place to stay for a little while." "Just temporarily," I said to him. There was yet another halt taken. And then, at long last, he responded, "Sure, Mom. Come on over. We'll figure it out ourselves." A wave of relief washed over me. Despite the fact that it was not the result I had hoped for, it was still something. If I were to be okay, the fact that David was my son meant that he would look after me. Because I was his mother, he would assist me in spite of the fact that we were separated by a great distance and that our connection had become increasingly difficult over the years. When I woke up the following morning, I was staring at the burnt remnants of my house. 9 in the morning was when the insurance adjuster arrived. A young man, he gave off the impression that he would have rather to be somewhere else. He had a clipboard with him as he wandered through the remains, taking pictures and notes along the way. "Total loss," he replied in a tone that was unengaging. It was as if that sentence, those 2 words, did not encompass everything that I had ever known. I dreaded hearing the response to my question, "How much?" "Well, you had a policy of about $200,000 on the structure, but with your deductible and depreciation, you're looking at maybe $90,000, maybe less," he responded in response. "There are $90,000. Yes, that was it. To reconstruct memories spanning 42 years and to make up for everything that I had lost." It appeared to be impossible. However, there was no time to ruminate on the matter. What I needed to do next was to find out what to do. I was not able to contain my tears for very long. Mrs. Jenkins assisted me in purchasing some fundamental garments with the emergency monies that I had been granted by the Red Cross. I was standing there feeling absolutely empty before her. It was as if I were a stranger in my own skin, and the clothes that I purchased made me feel as if I were living someone else's life. Everything I possessed at the time could be packed into a small suitcase. It was the only thing I had left. Taking a taxi to David's residence gave me the impression that I was traveling to a different country. At this point, everything appeared to be different since I had nowhere to return to. For some reason, it appeared as though the gas station where I purchased my lottery tickets and the cafe where Robert and I had breakfast on Sundays belonged to someone else as of the present moment. David's neighborhood was as clean as a whistle. The lawns were perfected to the point of perfection. There was no dirt on the sidewalks. As if it had been taken straight from a magazine, it appeared. He appeared to be living in a world that was unaffected by anything. In addition, I had the impression that I was an invader. I can't help but worry what would happen after I arrived there. Stay tuned to find out more about it. I can't help but worry what would happen after I arrived there. Stay tuned to find out more about it. As the taxi made its way down the well-known street that led to David's residence, it did so slowly. It was impossible for me to avoid experiencing a sense of melancholy as we walked past the picture-perfect houses, with their well-manicured lawns and bushes that were carefully clipped. I no longer had my previous life, which was straightforward, chaotic, and filled with the people I loved. The existence that I was about to enter felt like a world that I had no business being a part of. The residence of David became visible. The house that Victoria, his fiancée, had chosen to live in was a magnificent colonial with 2 stories, white shutters, and a red entrance. When they moved in, which was only a few years ago, I could still remember the day. David was filled with such pride. Even though the house was stunning, it wasn't even close to being the same as the home that Robert and I had created together. I couldn't help but feel as though I was not at home. I made the payment to the taxi driver and then stood there for a few periods, taking in the breathtaking view of the house that my son had constructed with his fiancée. I reached for my compact luggage and made my way up the driveway, each step with a greater sense of weight than the one before it. What I was about to enter was completely unknown to me. How would David and Victoria respond to this? Is it even possible that they would welcome me? As soon as I arrived at the front door, I experienced a sinking sensation in my gut, like if the floor underneath me was dissipating. After David's divorce, I was no longer the woman who had reared him, provided his meals, sat up with him when he was sick, or assisted him in getting through the divorce process. Up until this point, I was nothing more than a burden, someone who required a place to stay until things improved. The door was knocked on by me. It was opened by David before I even had the opportunity to knock in the correct manner. For a brief period, his face, which was both familiar and distant, stared at me. I was able to feel a little amount of warmth and a little piece of home when I looked into his eyes, which were the same eyes that Robert had. However, that feeling rapidly dissipated when I noticed his expression. In spite of the fact that he was courteous and allowed me to enter, his tone of speech did not have the warmth that I had hoped for. David called out, "Mom," but there was something about the way he made his voice sound that made me feel like an intruder. "Come on in." Upon entering their residence, I was instantly impressed by how flawless everything appeared to be for the first time. Every single element in the living room, from the walls to the furniture, was white. The living room was immaculate. Although it appeared to be a location where people lived, it appeared to be a show home, the kind of house in which everything was carefully selected and nothing was ever removed from its place. My every action seemed to be being scrutinized, and I had the sensation that I was walking on glass. Her smile was well placed, but her eyes were icy. Victoria emerged practically immediately after its appearance. It was the same practiced expression of sympathy that she used to greet me, but it didn't quite reach her gaze. Her tone was courteous, but I could see that she was looking for the shortest way to get back to whatever was more important to her. "Grace, how horrible about your house," she murmured, but it was obvious that she was more interested in my bag than in me. David told me what happened. After placing my suitcase in the foyer, I took a quick look around at their incredibly well-designed residence. It did not have the feeling of being a genuine home. I had the impression that it was more of a showcase for a life that I did not comprehend. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to recover my composure. The idea of being the one who needed assistance was foreign to me. It had always been me who offered assistance, but now I found myself in a position where I was reliant on my kid. Attempting to persuade myself as much as I was attempting to persuade them, I said, "It's just passing through. Just until I can get back on my feet." There was a gaze that David and Victoria shared, but it was one that I was unable to fully understand. It was one of those chats that couples say to each other in silence, the kind that leaves you feeling isolated and uninvolved. When I was standing here in their house, I had the impression that I was being excluded from something that I did not even comprehend, despite the fact that I had witnessed Robert and I have done it countless times. I was brought by David to the living room, where the furniture appeared to be in pristine condition, as if it had never been used before. I was supposed to sit down, but it felt more like a show than anything else. From that point on, I was an outsider in their world, that ideal world of theirs. David asked in a tone that was not overly enthusiastic. "So, what's the plan?" Only a tone that was businesslike was there. There was neither affection nor warmth. We were sitting in an armchair across from each other, and he maintained a distance that appeared to be more physical than emotional. I didn't want to accept that it hurt more than it did. I was hesitant. In my throat, the words seemed to become trapped. "The insurance adjuster said it'll take a few weeks to process everything, maybe a month. I was hoping I could stay here until then. Just until I find a small apartment or something." The hush was unbroken. With my pulse racing in my chest, I waited, praying that David would comprehend what I was going through. After then, however, there was an excessively long gap. At that moment, it seemed as though time itself was elongating, and the air seemed to become more dense with each passing second. Victoria made a gesture that appeared to be both sympathetic and possessive by leaning forward slightly and laying her hand on David's arm. For a brief moment, her eyes strayed to me, but then they swiftly returned to David. As she spoke to Grace, her tone was gentle but forceful. "It's not about being a bother," she exclaimed. "It's about space. This house is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple." My chest became more taut. As if a heavy blanket were being draped over me, I felt the weight of those words descend over me. The void. It was exactly what they required. I was the one who was obstructing the path of others. I said, I am his mother, in a tone that was more abrasive than I had intended. When I finally managed to stop myself from uttering those words, I found myself wishing that I could take them back as soon as they left my mouth. Despite her sweetness, Victoria grinned. Of course you are, Grace, she answered in a quiet and gentle tone. And that's why we thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere you can have your independence while you rebuild. A different location. My mind kept going back to the words. A different location. Her tone gave the impression that she was implying that I did not belong in this place, that I was no longer a part of their universe. I looked to David, expecting that he would disagree with what she was saying. If he were to say something, anything at all, that would make me feel like I was a genuine person in his life, I would be grateful. Nevertheless, he gave a slow nod and said, Victoria's right. Mom, we think you'd be happier with your own space. The statements were like a blow to the gut on a regular basis. He could not possibly say that. All of my possessions had been taken away from me, and now my own son was telling me that I would be happier staying by myself in a hotel room than in his house? My mind was blown by the news. For David, I had sacrificed everything I had. And at this moment, it seemed as though he was prioritizing the comfort of his fiancée over the requirements of his own mother. I got to my feet, and the room began to spin around me. My knees shook in protest, which served as a reminder of my advanced age, about how isolated I actually was. With a tone that was barely above a whisper, I stated, I understand, in a flat tone. David spoke to his mother in a more subdued tone, saying, Mom, don't be like that. It was, however, too late. Damage had already been done to the situation. I was not wanted to be here by them. All I was a weight for them to bear. At that moment, Victoria, who had been so composed and controlled, appeared to be experiencing some discomfort. There was a little moment of hesitation in her smile. However, this was not sufficient to convince her to change her mind. It wasn't enough to convince her that everything that was going on was ridiculous. I reached for my suitcase, the weight of which seemed to be increasing at this moment. I stifled the words out of my mouth and said, I'll go. I don't want to make this harder than it already is. When I left their picture-perfect house, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had lost more than just my home. I felt as though I had lost something much more significant. As a member of my own family, I had lost my position. But what would take place after that? Maintain your attention to find out. But what would take place after that? Maintain your attention to find out. When I left David's house, I had the impression that I was walking through a fog. I was disoriented and unclear of what I should do next. Despite the fact that I had anticipated feeling disappointed, I was not prepared to feel so invisible. In spite of the fact that I had surrendered everything to him, my own kid had rejected me. When it came to Victoria, she had made it abundantly plain that I was nothing more than an annoyance. It wasn't about comfort. Rather, it was about their privacy. The notion kept going through my head, and it was eating away at me with each step that I made as I was walking. From this point forward, where did I go? I wandered around the streets of Valentine, the suburban community where David lived, without any particular destination in mind. It was so different from my reality. It was so flawless and completely unspoiled. Particularly in light of the fact that my life appeared to have disintegrated in such a short period of time, it was difficult to avoid feeling out of place. I had no home, no family to rely on, and the only thing I had was a suitcase full of clothes that I had purchased with those emergency cash. It could not have been real. Not a single one of them did. A short distance of walking brought me to a little eatery that was located on the outskirts of the town. There was nothing special about it. It was just a spot where the locals went to have a bite to eat. Despite the fact that I did not have a lot of money left, I decided to purchase a cup of coffee and sit in the booth in the corner where I could have the place to myself. None of the inquiries were asked by the waitress, who was an older woman with gentle eyes. Without making a sound, she simply smiled at me and poured me a cup of the strongest coffee that they had available. For a brief instant, I had the sensation that I could breathe normally once more. The steam rose up in a soothing swirl, and the coffee was heated to a high temperature. While I was staring out the window, I observed the world passing by. The world that I was a part of appeared to be so vibrant, but I had the impression that I was standing still. An insignificant portion of me wanted to call David once more. Perhaps he wouldn't have meant what he had said. It's possible that the tension brought on by everything that had occurred was the cause. On the other hand, another part of me was aware that I could not retreat. By that point, I had already become an excessive burden. Not only had the fire robbed me of everything, but now David had also robbed me of the ability to maintain my dignity. As I attempted to regain my composure, I drew a breath in deeply. While I was wrapping my hands around the warm mug, I felt a little tremor affecting them. Now, what was it that I was meant to do? An answer was not available to me. Following that, a notion occurred to me, a recollection that I hadn't given much thought to in many years. Our Randa. It was Randa Galloway, the love of my life. The individual who had assured me that he would come back for me at some point in the future. Together, we had discussed our aspirations, which included establishing a future, developing a family, and achieving everything else that we want in life. However, life had gotten in the way, and we had lost contact with one another. For what seemed like decades, I hadn't given him any attention at all. However, at that precise moment, while I was sitting by myself in a modest cafe in a place that was not mine, I came to a realization. It was only to him that I could turn for assistance. I was still in possession of his resume. After all these years, I had been holding on to it. Despite the fact that it had never been used, it had become yellowed and worn from being carried around in my wallet. It was merely a memento of a time when I believed I had everything figured out. It never occurred to me that I would truly require it. But now that I had nothing left, I pondered whether or not it was possible for me to call him. Could he be of assistance to me? Perhaps he was still the same person I had remembered. It's possible that he is the one who can assist me in regaining my bearings. After finishing my coffee and leaving a gratuity for the waitress, I walked out into the chilly afternoon air and enjoyed the fresh air. I made my way back to the motel as my thoughts were racing. The weight of the business card in my pocket was palpable, and for the first time in what seemed like days, I experienced a glimmer of hope for the future. It's possible that Randall was the solution to the problem. Finally, the following day, after what seemed like hours of pacing around in my cramped hotel room, I decided to take the leap after all. As I rang the number, my fingers were shaking as I grabbed the card out of my purse and reached for it. The phone rang once, twice, and then, much to my astonishment, someone picked up the phone. Galloway Development chimed in a voice that was deep. Randall speaking. It caused my heart to skip a beat. He was the one. Ultimately, it was him after all these years had passed. For a little period, I was at a loss for words and hesitated. At this point, what could I possibly say? Could he possibly recall me at all? When I finally managed to speak, my voice was shaking as I asked, Randall. I paused, unsure of how to express what I was saying. It's Grace. Grace Thorne. I don't know why I'm calling, but I need help. My house burned down. I have nowhere to go. I don't know who else to turn to. On the other end of the telephone, there was a lengthy pause that I could hear. During the time that I waited for his response, I could feel my heart beating rapidly in my chest. His tone was low and filled with astonishment when he addressed Grace. Grace, he whispered. It's really you. The very fact that he spoke was sufficient to cause tears to rise up in my eyes. He had not forgotten about me after all these years had passed. The vows that we had made were not forgotten by him. He continued by saying, I am shocked and saddened to learn about your home. Where are you? I can come to get you. Don't worry about a thing. Just tell me where you are. I was so relieved that I almost broke down in tears. The individual who had made a commitment to return for me, the individual who had been a part of my history, was now volunteering to assist me at the time when I required assistance the most. It exceeded my expectations and exceeded my expectations. In less than an hour, he arrived at the hotel where I was staying after I provided him with the specifics of the establishment. When I looked out the window, I noticed his silver Mercedes pulling up, shining brightly in the afternoon light. When he got out of the car, I immediately recognized him, despite the fact that it had been 40 years since we had last made eye contact with one another. Not much had changed about him. In spite of the fact that his hair had become somewhat grayer and his face had become slightly more mature, the minute he smiled, it was as if nothing had changed. He remained the same man that I had loved in the past, the man who had assured me that he would come back for everything. The first thing that he did was remain silent. The only thing he did was look at me, taking in the new lady I had formed. I had the impression that I was standing there in front of a ghost from my past, but this ghost was not only warm and solid, but it was also very genuine. My experience was one that I hadn't had in many years. "Grace," he whispered, gently lowering his voice, "you look beautiful." I was struck by the words like a wave. Honestly, I was at a loss for words. "What do you mean?" I had nothing to offer him other than the shattered pieces of a life that had been ruined. Nevertheless, here he was, standing in front of me, telling me that I was stunning. It seemed as if I had entered another planet, one in which genuine feelings of affection and generosity were still present. It was a delicate yet powerful grip that he used to take my suitcase away from me. The tone of his voice remained firm as he said, "Let's get you out of here. I'm not letting you stay in this place any longer." During the time that we were driving away from the motel, I experienced a sense of calm or tranquility that engulfed me. It's possible that it wasn't too late to begin over. Perhaps just possibly, Randall was the missing piece that I had been looking for all these years while I was seeking for him. It felt like I was traveling through time as I made my way to his residence. There was some communication between us, but the majority of it consisted of comfortable silences during the discourse. As soon as we got at his house, I was unable to believe what I was seeing. It was not at all like the house that I had forgotten about. Even though it was grand, it was not icy or unwelcoming in any way. There was a warmth to it, something that made me feel as though I could at last take a breath again. After assisting me with my suitcase, Randall took me inside the building. "Welcome home," he whispered in a low voice. And during that moment, I got the realization that perhaps, just possibly, I had discovered the location where I was supposed to be all along. He had responded, "Welcome home," and at that very moment, I had a realization that I hadn't allowed myself to believe for a very long time, perhaps just possibly I wasn't as lost as I had imagined I was. There was no way to refute the fact that the mansion was magnificent. As I entered the building, I experienced the weight of my previous life, my previous residence, the fire, and the disappointment, all of which were being replaced by something that I had not anticipated that would happen. There is a feeling of tranquility. In the beginning, it was not very noticeable. It was almost like a gentle breeze. Nevertheless, as I stood in the foyer of Randall's house, I started to feel the pleasant warmth. In addition to the warmth of the hearth, there was also the warmth of his presence, which was a connection that had never really been severed. The first time we spoke on the phone, Randall's voice was steady and a little more confident than it had been. He said, "Let me show you to your room," explaining that he would bring you to your room. When his eyes met mine, I felt like I was free from the burden of being a burden for the first time in what seemed like an eternity time. I was not merely someone who should be pitied or accommodated. Rather, I was someone who was acknowledged, desired, and comprehended. It was impossible for me not to notice how exquisitely everything was arranged as we made our way through the house. Despite the fact that it was sophisticated and attractive, the furniture was also worn and worn out. The polished wood flooring were adorned with plants that were strategically placed to bring a sense of life to the space. There were books stacked on coffee tables, photographs of Randall with friends and family on the walls, and plants put in strategic locations. The atmosphere was not that of a mansion, rather it was that of a home. The location where someone lived and where they felt a sense of belonging. I was escorted by Randall to the guest room, which was a room that was wide and warm, and it had a large window that looked out over the expansive gardens that were located outside. The bed was spacious, very inviting, and adorned with luxurious linens of the highest quality. There was nothing threatening about it, despite the fact that it appeared to be something that had been taken from a magazine. The walls were embellished with muted hues, and the furniture, despite its opulent appearance, exuded a sense of convenience. There was a chair beside the window that was ideal for reading or just sitting and thinking about nothing in particular. When Randall noticed that I was taking everything in, he continued, "I know it's not much, but I hope it will do for now." Despite my best efforts, I couldn't help but smile. My response was, "It's perfect," and I was overcome with gratitude for his generosity. It was clear that he had gone to great lengths to ensure that I was at ease and that I was made to feel welcome. At the same time as the bed and the room were both acts of kindness, there was something more profound at play here. The event served as a timely reminder that, in spite of everything that had gone wrong, life still possessed the potential to experience goodness. As I looked about, I immediately found myself at a loss for what to do next. I placed my luggage on the bed and looked around. Even though I had only recently begun living this new life, I had the impression that I was still clinging to the previous one. Not only did I not want to overstay my welcome, but I also did not want to give the impression that I was ungrateful. It appeared like Randall was aware of my reluctance. It seemed as though he had read my mind when he said, "You are free to remain here for as long as you wish. There's no rush. You don't have to worry about anything right now." Moreover, for the very first time in a very long time, I had the sensation that I did not have to. There was no need for me to be concerned about money, about where I would sleep, or about foods that I would consume. Suddenly, I was able to take a deep breath. It was possible for me to liberate myself from the tight hold I had on my own survival and give myself permission to be cared for. In the following few days, I gradually became accustomed to my surroundings. In the mornings, I would spend my time in the guest room, where I would sit by the window and drink coffee while watching the sun rise over the rolling hills in the distance. I felt as though the tranquility of the place was permeating my very being. As a result of my life's ongoing tension, I've become so accustomed to it that I had forgotten what it was like to rest, to not be constantly looking over my shoulder for the next catastrophe to occur. There was no coercion involved in the time that Randall and I spent together. We did not spend a lot of time discussing the past, at least not yet. Rather than that, we simply took pleasure in each other's presence, as if we were old friends getting back together after a long separation. We discussed a variety of topics, including life, the weather, and books. At other times, we sat in silence, simply taking pleasure in the company of one another and the comfort it brought. As time went on, I found myself preparing meals for him. My sense was that it was something I could do to make a contribution, something I could do to make myself feel like I was contributing. Even though I was still unclear of where I fit in this new world, cooking was one thing that felt normal to me. Cooking had always been a way for me to demonstrate love, and it was something that I had always done. To my surprise, Randall. He appeared to value it more than I had anticipated. He was appreciative of each and every meal that I prepared, regardless of how straightforward it was. A recipe for chicken and dumplings that had been handed down to me from my grandmother was the one that I attempted to make one evening. In spite of the fact that it was neither elaborate nor complicated, it was cozy and reassuring, exactly as I had always made it. Immediately after I placed the plate in front of him, Randall smiled and took a bite out of it. He said, "This is incredible," as his eyes lit up with excitement. I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years. I find that one simple compliment to be more meaningful to me than anything else he has said to me since I arrived. It wasn't just about the meal. It was about the recognition of my efforts and the fact that I was a part of his life. The modest relationship that we had restored over something as simple as a dinner was the focus of our conversation. The tone of my voice was mild as I added, "I'm glad you like it." I had the impression that I was starting to find my place in this house, even if it was only in a few minor ways. And after that, something was different. Randall began to reveal more of his life to me, including his triumphs, his failures, and his regrets, among other things. While we were sitting by the fire one evening, he shared some of his history with us. He shared with me the history of his company, describing how it had begun as a modest construction company and had now expanded into something much more substantial. Despite the fact that they appeared to be successful on the surface, he revealed his experiences with a number of different women over the course of his life. These relationships had never quite worked out. There was one woman, he whispered slowly, his eyes looking off in the distance. As he stopped, it appeared as like he was considering what he was going to say next. Her name was Elena. She was an architect, brilliant, and beautiful. Everyone thought that we were perfect for each other. We were even engaged at one point. But when it came time to marry her, I realized something was missing. It wasn't her, it was me. I was still in love with someone else, someone I met a long time ago. In the moment that he spoke those words, I felt a lump form in my throat. I was completely aware of the person he was referring to. It was he who was referring to me. Even after all these years, he had never stopped loving me. He had never stopped. His voice was filled with remorse as he stated, "I called it off the night before the wedding," he said. I had to be honest with myself and with her. I told her that I couldn't marry her because my heart was still with someone else. It was like a wave that hit me. Never in all of this time, in all of these years, has he ever forgotten about me. Because he had been holding me in his heart. He had been waiting for the proper time, waiting for me to come back to him. While I was looking at him, I was at a loss for words. The past appeared to be so far away, but at that same time, it seemed as though we were both continuing to be those two young people who were full of hopes and guarantees. "I have never stopped loving you, Grace," he whispered to her. "Not once." I couldn't. And now you're here, and I want to make up for all the years we lost. As I came to terms with the significance of his remarks, tears began to well up in my eyes. I had an impression that my life was over. When I believed I had nothing left, I was wrong. Randall, however, was there, giving me the opportunity to try again. This is a chance that I never imagined I would have. The moment I laid eyes on him, I was certain of one thing: I was no longer feeling isolated. I was not forgotten or abandoned in any way. There was only one person who genuinely understood me, and I had found my way back to them. There was only one person who genuinely understood me, and I had found my way back to them. The days that followed were like a dream, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared to wake up from it. Randall and I were able to establish a new pattern, one that was smooth and effortless, as if we had never been separated for an extended period of time. There was a sense of ease that came from being in his presence. It was a feeling that was very familiar. And the manner in which he listened to me and looked at me, he made it appear as though I were the only person in the entire world who was significant. I didn't have the sensation that I was lacking in visibility for the first time in years. I was always greeted by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee when I walked downstairs in the morning. Since Randall had always been an early riser, I had developed the practice of getting up with him first thing in the morning. When the sun was rising over the hills, we would sit on the back porch, sipping our coffee and watching the scene unfold. He would sit and read the newspaper while I would observe the birds that were feeding from his intricate feeders, and I would be amazed at how tranquil everything appeared to be. During those time periods, I experienced a sense of tranquility that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. It was as if the burden of my previous existence had been lifted off of my shoulders. On the other hand, it wasn't simply the mornings. Additionally, it was the evenings. When we were both exhausted at the end of the day, Randall and I would go for walks hand in hand around his property. He was the proud owner of a stunning garden that he had personally developed. I was awestruck by the rows of flowers, the walks that had been meticulously maintained, and the greenhouse that was brimming with orchids. Plants have always been something that I have had a deep appreciation for, and seeing how Randall had made this garden his own brought back memories of the time when Robert and I had planted our very first garden together. Randall once stated, "These are my escape," as we were strolling through the garden together. I work hard, but I find peace here in the soil, in the plants. It's where I can clear my head. I may be able to comprehend that. The garden that I had left behind was the place where I had always found peace and tranquility. In contrast, there was something therapeutic about this new one, something about the fact that we were tending to it jointly that gave me the impression that I was beginning to lay roots once more. There were other times when we didn't have to say anything at all, which was a very pleasant experience. When we were sitting by the fireplace, the sound of the logs crackling filled the room, and we took pleasure in the warmth that they provided. There was no need for any of the words. To put it simply, we were pleased with each other's company and simply existed in the same area. The mere act of being present with someone without the strain of discussion or expectations wasn't something I had experienced before. I had forgotten what it felt like. They were not in a hurry. There is no need to figure out everything at the same time. In many respects, it was as if we were constructing something from the ground up, and we did so carefully and with patience. The fact that we were not in a rush, on the other hand, played a significant role. During the course of one evening, after dinner, Randall turned to me as we were sitting in front of the fireplace. His look was thoughtful. "Grace," he started, his voice gently but steadily resonating. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we've been through and what we're building now. And I know it's a lot to take in, but I need you to know something." As I waited for him to continue, I directed my gaze toward him. "I want this to be real. I want us to be real. For the first time in my life, I'm not running away from something. I'm not chasing some idea of success or wealth. I'm just with you. And that's enough." His remarks struck me more strongly than I had anticipated. They have a quality that was so open and exposed to the elements. It was the man who had built a commercial empire and who had the world at his feet who was telling me that all of that was meaningless in comparison to the life that we were now constructing together. During that very instant, I became aware that this was not simply a matter of me locating a place to stay or making some kind of temporary arrangement. It was a true event. This was the moment I had been looking forward to, not only in terms of romantic love, but also in terms of life in general. "I don't know what the future holds," he continued, placing his hand on my shoulder, "but I want to face it with you. I want to make up for the years we lost. And I want to see where this takes us. Together." As I gazed at him, my thoughts was racing and my heart was experiencing a surge of emotion. There were a lot of things that I wanted to say, but I felt like my words were not sufficient. Instead, I merely gave his hand a gentle squeeze, allowing the calm power of the moment to speak for itself. I murmured yes, and the word seemed to represent a promise to me. Yes. From that point on, everything was different. In addition to the mansion, the gardens, and the comfort of his companionship, it was not just the house. Having the realization that I was no longer alone was the turning point, not only in this property, but also in this entire planet. After what seemed like years, I finally had the feeling that I had discovered my place and my purpose in life. Not only was it about surviving, but it was also about living to the fullest. As the weeks went by, I noticed that I was growing more and more used to this new existence with each passing day. The more I cooked, the more I experimented with different dishes, and the more I rediscovered my passion for the kitchen. I could tell that Randall genuinely enjoyed the work that I put into each dish that I prepared, since he was always eager to try whatever I had prepared. It wasn't about making a good impression on him. Rather, it was about connecting with him and sharing a little bit of myself via the preparation of the meals. As well as that, we spent more time together. In addition to going to museums and going for walks in the nearby park, we also went to some of his business events together during our time together. My initial reaction was one of reluctance. I didn't want to have the impression that I was taking up space in his universe. On the other hand, Randall made me feel as like I was a part of his life, and it made me feel like I belonged there. In the past, I had always been the one to look after other people, but suddenly I was the one who was being looked after, and it was a new experience, but it was also liberating. However, it was not a simple task. Even though I had reached a point of peace with Randall, there were still times when I found myself longing for the life I had before. I longed for the peaceful mornings spent with Robert, the uncomplicated conveniences of my previous residence, and even the regularity of taking care of my baby. On the other hand, those emotions did not continue to overpower me. Simply put, they served as reminders of where I had come from and how far I had progressed since that horrific fire. And then one day, while I was cleaning up after breakfast, Randall stepped into the kitchen with a smile on his face on the occasion of his arrival. "Grace," he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm, "I've been thinking. I want to do something special for you, for us. I want us to start over, not just in this house, but in the world. I want us to travel. To see the world, do the things we've always talked about but never had the chance to do. I want to build memories, not just walls around us." When I considered the thought of traveling and experiencing the world with Randall by my side, I was overwhelmed with a sense of possibility that I hadn't had in many years. Due to the fact that I had spent so much time concentrating on surviving, I had completely forgotten what it was like to dream once more. "Yes," I responded, using the word without much effort. "Let's do it. Let's start over." While I was in that same moment, I realized that I was no longer simply waiting for life to take its course. I was experiencing it firsthand. My innermost being went through a profound change as we started making plans for our trip. It was no longer the case that I was the woman who had lost everything. I was someone who had taken advantage of a second opportunity, and I was not going to let it go to waste. The voyage that Rundle and I set out on was one that would take us to new locations, new experiences, and new vistas altogether. We went on adventures together hand in hand, and as we were doing so, I came to an understanding about something. In point of fact, the fire that had annihilated my existence had made room for something that was significantly more favorable, a future that was sparkling with hope and full of potential. Together, we never ceased developing as a unit. Every single day was a fresh opportunity, a chance to construct something that was both beautiful and significant. On the other hand, the past was in the past, and the future was ours to construct. How did you feel about this story? Which location are you observing from? You are welcome to express your ideas by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed reading this story, please do not forget to tell your friends about it or send a heartfelt thank you message. I cannot express how much I appreciate your support, and I can't wait to share with you further stories like to this one. Watch the next two stories that appear on your screen. They are packed with unexpected turns that you won't want to miss out on. Ensure that you subscribe so that you are never left out of the action. Have a good time in the following video.